Video 4, long-term sickness absence. This video will cover the long-term absence review meetings, long-term absence final absence hearings, and exceptional circumstances in the management of long-term final absence hearings, ill health retirement, case conferences, and redeployment. So long-term sickness absence. This is any period of sickness absence that exceeds 3 weeks. So 3 weeks in itself is not actually classed as long-term sick. So when staff go off long-term sick, managers need to arrange to meet with their staff regularly during that long-term period of sickness. The meetings enable managers to keep informed about the employee's sickness and allow the employee to keep informed about any changes or updates at work, and it enables support for the employee to be explored and identifying a return to work plan. The meeting should take place, really the first one should take place as soon as your long-term sickness is triggered. And then ideally after that, once a month, until they either return back to work, they may choose to resign, or it might get escalated to a final absence hearing. So the meetings can take place more or less frequently, depending on the reason for their absence and with agreement from both parties, the manager and member of staff. That needs to be documented as well. NICE guidance recommends to meet with employees between ideally 2 to 6 weeks from starting their long-term sickness, as early intervention will increase the likelihood of them returning to work with the appropriate support. There may be circumstances where you know the employee will be off long-term sick, such as for a planned surgery with a long recovery period. So it might be that this meeting is held before the long-term sickness is triggered in order to be proactive. So for example, before the 3-week period. So long-term sickness should be handled sensitively, fairly, and on an individual basis. So just because 2 people might be off with the same reason, for example, stress, depression, anxiety, you might have 2 members of staff off for that. It doesn't mean that you have to manage it in the same way. They may require different types of support. You might have one member of staff that needs that regular contact. You might have somebody that actually needs that bit more space. So the aim of the meetings are to assist recovery and facilitate a return to work where possible. Managers should fully explore reasonable adjustments and if redeployment is required. You should be particularly sensitive to the needs of employees with terminal illnesses, and you should seek early advice, information and support from HR and occupational health and pensions in these cases. That's covered more in video 7 and also in the toolkit. If the employee is unable to get into work for the meeting, it might be appropriate to hold the meeting either at their house, with their consent obviously, or outside of the workplace, but just make sure you can maintain confidentiality. This must be arranged and agreed with the employee in advance. So employees will not be required to come in for long-term sick meetings if they are, for example, hospitalised, or they're physically unable to get to work. But they can request that you visit them in them cases. Case conferences. So it's quite rare that we hold these, but these are collaborative meetings which may involve the employee, the manager, their union rep, HR and occupational health. So it's normally where there's it's complex and where there's some mixed messages or disagreements. It might be, for example, we can't agree on the return to work or a reasonable adjustment or what support they might need. So these case conferences basically get everybody together where we can explore openly and collaboratively with all parties present. So the long-term absence review meetings. So before the the meeting takes place, employees should receive an invite letter at least 7 days before the meeting. There's a template in the toolkit. The checklist is also in the toolkit. That's a guide for managers about what you should cover in the meeting. So I'll just quickly run through that. So you should obviously discuss the reason for why they're off. Determine how long the sickness is likely to last. If future absences are likely to occur, obviously once they've come back to work. You need to consider if any advice from occupational health, their GP, or any other health practitioner, and whether they've got any underlying conditions. Consider what measures might improve the health of the employee, whether it's work-related or not. Discuss any treatment plans that they might have in place, and how long they're expected, and what their treatment plans are. Review any sickness in the previous 12 months. So just to determine if there's any linked underlying conditions. This information may also be used to help support with reasonable adjustments and obviously inform occupational health. It may also highlight any previous patterns with their sickness, which the manager should discuss with that member of staff. Like I'd mentioned in one of the other videos, if you look at the previous sickness and you've noticed a pattern, say for example with gastro problems, it might be they've got an undiagnosed condition, so it's important to discuss that with that member of staff. So what formal stage they have triggered. Anyone on long-term sick would normally trigger a stage because they've already exceeded 2 weeks or a working week. So it's an opportunity just to make them aware of what stage they're on. It might not be relevant depending on the reason for the sickness or what you've discussed in that meeting. So just be sensitive around that. Any steps to support the employee during their absence. What reasonable adjustments, alterations or modifications to their normal role or duties or working hours or working environment that would support them to return to work. And then finally to agree a way forward. So what action will be taken, what timescales have you agreed for a review, and then agree when you're next going to meet for the next long-term sickness meeting if they're not returning to work. So any details discussed in that meeting need to be documented in the outcome letter. That should be sent obviously after the meeting and retain a copy in their file. There is a template again on the toolkit. All options. So if you've considered all options, so reasonable adjustments, redeployment opportunities, nothing is coming up that's suitable or there's nothing available, you've looked at all the medical advice and that's saying that there's no imminent return to work or a return to work may be unlikely within a reasonable time frame, you could then look at exploring ill health retirement, and it might be the employee chooses to resign, or normally at this stage we would look at progressing the case to a final absence hearing. So if the case is escalated to a hearing, that's where an independent panel will look at the employee's whole case of sickness from the start of joining the trust and the reason that's triggered them onto the final absence hearing, which is long-term sickness. So they'll review that and make a decision as to whether we can sustain this period of long-term sickness further or whether they need to consider dismissal on the grounds of capability due to ill health. For medical and dental staff, please refer to Part 5 of the MHPS, that's Maintaining High Professional Standards. Again, that's also in the toolkit. If managers make the decision to refer the case to a final absence hearing, the manager needs to write a report and that needs to be sent to all parties. So that's the member of staff and the panel that will be hearing the case. So that's documented further in the policy and obviously in the toolkit. So there's a template report available. There's an agenda for the hearing and there's all the template invite letters and outcome letters on there as well. But make sure in these cases you get advice from employee relations. So we will support managers with writing that report process and getting the hearing arranged. Long-term sickness final absence hearings. So you would likely refer to somebody to a final absence hearing when they've been off long-term sick for more than 6 months and there's no agreed return to work date, or the employee is unable to return to work on the agreed return to work date, as you've discussed in your long-term absence review meeting, or it might be identified at any time frame that the employee is unable to return to work in any capacity. It might be that this is identified very early on in the long-term sickness. So managers should inform their staff if their case has been referred to a hearing. You can do this normally if they're off long-term sick. That would be during one of the long-term sickness meetings. That should then be documented in their outcome letter from the meeting. Or if it's where you've not actually discussed it in the meeting and you've made that decision outside, that you should ring the employee if you've not got an opportunity to discuss it in the next long-term sickness meeting if one's not due, or you can write to them to confirm that. It's always best to make sure that member of staff's aware so it's not a shock that they just find out in a letter. So long-term absence, final absence hearings, it's exactly the same process as any other final absence hearing. The only difference really is that they're off long-term sick, so they might not actually be on any formal stage, whereas general final absence hearings, they could have triggered right through stage 1, 2, 3 and then got referred. But the process itself is the same. So that's discussed more in video 3. Again, if you want in any templates or agendas or the report, that's all in the toolkit. So when managers have decided to refer an employee's case to a final absence hearing, a manager will be appointed to chair that hearing. This has to be somebody who's a band 8B or above because they're managers that have dismissing authority. The whole point of the hearing is to consider whether we can sustain their employment. So this will be on the basis that the employee has been unable to demonstrate an acceptable level of attendance and there's no foreseeable return to work date identified, or it might be we've exhausted all reasonable alternatives. So the manager must consider whether a further referral to occupational health is necessary in order to obtain an up-to-date assessment. It might be that you've done one like a month before and there's been no change since, so in those cases it might not be necessary. But again, seek advice from your HR advisor. If the member of staff is a member of the NHS pension scheme and they've not already retired and returned, they may wish to explore ill health retirement. So this is where they are unable to work in any capacity, and it's exploring accessing their pension early on the grounds of ill health, but I'll come on to that more next. So ill health retirement. This is when a decision is made that the employee is permanently incapable of carrying out their substantive role and where all adjustments have been made, including considering redeployment. The employee may wish to discuss the option of ill health retirement. Only employees who are members of the NHS pension scheme with at least 2 years membership and meet the eligibility criteria set by the NHS Pensions Agency are eligible to apply for ill health. So this option can only be considered at the employee's request. It's an external process. It's got really nothing to do with the Rotherham Foundation Trust, so we don't make any decisions as to whether people are accepted or not. That's done externally. So in these circumstances, in the first instance, employees should speak to our pensions officer. We cannot give pensions or finance advice, whether it's HR or occupational health. That can only be done through the pensions officer. You can also obviously get advice through financial advisors, and this can be done independently by the employee. So whilst the trust can support employees in completing the relevant documentation for the application, it's not the Rotherham Foundation Trust's decision. So this is completely separate. But it may be that whilst an employee decides to apply for ill health, the trust still go through the final absence hearing process and still make a decision to dismiss. Each case for ill health retirement varies, so there's no set timescale. So when an employee applies for ill health retirement, firstly, it needs supporting by a medical practitioner or a GP or occupational health, so they will confirm whether they support the application. Then the pensions officer will email you, the manager, your relevant part of the form to complete. That's generally information about their sickness history, and their job description. The pensions officer will then send the employee their part of the form. So the big form is made up of different parts. So you'll get your bit, the employee gets their bit, the pensions officer fills out their bit. What will happen next is they will ask you to make a referral to occupational health containing their part of the form to complete. So once Occy Health have done their part, they then need to send the completed form off to NHS Pensions. So they should then let the pensions officer know once that's been sent. Then it's a matter of waiting for the outcome. So what is the decision from NHS Pensions of their application? This can take any length of time, so there is no guarantee on time frames or whether the application will be accepted. So unless the employee has resigned at that point, a final absence hearing will then be arranged regardless of the outcome of their application. Because by applying for ill health retirement in itself is acknowledging that they cannot continue working in any capacity. When an application for ill health retirement has been accepted by the NHS Pensions, a termination date would be agreed if they've not already left the trust. Because there's no set time frame, we usually find the employee's either resigned or has gone to a final absence hearing, sometimes prior to getting to the outcome. When it is clear that an employee will not be able to return to work in any capacity, they may be too unwell, and it is agreed that a final absence hearing is required. This may be that the employee has even recommended this and they may not want to resign. We often find that staff either prefer for their case to go to a hearing when acknowledging they can't continue working because they may benefit through receiving government benefits, or they may have had quite a long service with the trust and they don't want to resign. So in these cases, it might be agreed that the hearing is needed, or there are exceptional circumstances, particularly where the staff member is far too poorly to attend that it may be agreed for the hearing to go ahead in their absence, in which case that can be arranged because it's more sensitive, it might be too distressing for the member of staff, and they will be informed of what the outcome of the hearing is. This is normally when we know that termination of employment is likely, and that's normally accepted by all parties. Redeployment. So where an employee will recover sufficiently to return to work, but they may not be able to undertake their full duties or responsibilities of their substantive post, it might be that we need to consider redeployment. So this is normally recommended by occupational health, or it might come from another healthcare professional. More information is provided in our redeployment procedure or guide on the hub. So the redeployment is normally only considered where we can't make reasonable adjustments in their substantive post. There's a number of steps that we should follow when considering redeployment. So first of all, we should arrange a meeting with the member of staff, whether that's part of their long-term sickness meeting, if they're off long-term sick, or it might be a specific meeting to discuss redeployment. The employee should then be placed on the redeployment register for 3 months. So this will give them priority consideration for any vacancies alongside, obviously, any other staff that are on the redeployment register. So they need to get an invite letter for any meetings that they attend, and that is available in the toolkit. So once it's agreed that the employee needs to find redeployment, it is both the responsibility of the employee and the manager to try and find suitable alternative employment. So this might just be on a temporary basis. It might be on a permanent basis, depending on the employee's needs. And you can look, so it's worth contacting the recruitment team, first of all. So they'll be aware of any vacancies that might not be advertised yet. Look on NHS Jobs and look at the Trust's internal vacancy bulletin. So we'd advise to search on a weekly basis. So once a post has been identified that may be deemed as suitable, the conversations should happen with the new manager of that post, and so they should be aware of a member of staff that is on the redeployment register and can agree for a trial period. So whether that's before it's advertised or during the recruitment process, the manager can agree for that trial period, and that's to deem whether that role is suitable for the employee, but also that the employee is suitable for the role. So in cases of ill health redeployment, alternative posts will normally be considered on the same grade pay banding and normally on the same working hours as what they did in their substantive post, unless the employee agrees. So it might be that they need to reduce their hours due to the health condition, or it might be that they're happy to agree to the role on a lower band, but pay protection doesn't apply in those circumstances, but the employee has to be in agreement. If the role is not deemed suitable by either party, so whether that's the employee after doing a trial period, or it might be the manager that says they're not suitable for the role, the employee will then go back onto the redeployment register for the remainder of the 3 months they've got left. If the role is deemed suitable at the end of a trial period, the employer will then move into that role. So that could be on a temporary basis or permanent, depending on what it is. And they will then be removed from the redeployment register as it's no longer applicable. The new manager should then complete an ED1 form confirming the changes of the role, and the old manager should then hand over the employee's file to the new manager. If no suitable alternative roles are identified within that 3-month period, and it might be that the employee unreasonably refuses to complete a trial period or explore any suitable alternative employment, then a final absence hearing will be progressed.